Maybe some of you have seen the agenda already, maybe not. So we can present who's going to talk today. First of all, I'll give a little introduction in the latest changes from BaseX 7.8 to 7.8. Next, Andy Barnes will be presenting some of his work on XML benchmarking. He's been presenting things 2 years ago, I think. Something like that. Okay, next, Mansi will show us what she's done. She's in the area of security analytics, but she worked with very large XML instances, and she will tell us how this went along. Then we'll have a little coffee session. Then Max will present his work on a conference application that he built with the help of BaseX. Next, Marco. Here. Hi. I think you haven't started for too long ago with BaseX, but you have done quite a lot the last time in the domain of healthcare. So you will tell us in the commercial area what you've been doing here. And last but not least, Hans-Jürgen will present his topics tool. And I'm very glad that Hans-Jürgen just joined in. I wanted to have you earlier in our talks anyway, because Lars Johnson, who presented last year as well, he couldn't come. So Hans-Jürgen joined in, so thanks a lot. Okay, what has changed in BaseX in the last 12 months? I will simply highlight the most important things. There have been many minor issues as well. First of all, I'll talk about storage. And one thing is we have improved our document index. Maybe some of you have worked with large collections before, and if you wanted to access single documents of those collections, it was rather slow. It was fast if you traversed over all the documents, but especially in the area of REST requests and so on, it's very nice if you can access single documents quickly as well. So we added a document path index, which will be incrementally updated every update, and so we can quickly access single documents now as well. Next, we have worked on our update strategies. If you replace documents in the past, old documents were deleted and new ones were inserted. Now we try, whenever possible, to directly replace the documents in place. This also means if you edit an XML document, for example, and if you write it back to the storage, and if nothing has changed in this document, no update will take it all. So we try to not to update if nothing has changed at all. This means we don't need to update index structures and so on. Next, maybe some of you know that we also have some updatable index structures. They can be activated with this up-index flag. I don't know if some of you used it already, or are you working with this option? So usually index structures are discarded after updates, and if you activate this update index flag, they are incrementally updated. But this led in some cases to a huge consumption of disk space. We had one user who reported us that he had a 230 gigabytes instance of a BaseX file. I never experienced such large files anyway, and he only noticed this when his disk was full, and he was wondering because he has 500 gigabytes and it was really BaseX that created this big file. So this should now be over. Whenever we delete some slots in our storage, we try to refill them again, not just append it in the end. So this means on the one hand decreased disk space consumption, and on the other hand updates have got faster again. We have another convenience option, it's called auto-optimize. So whenever you do updates, this optimize command will automatically be triggered. This is particularly helpful if your databases are not too large. If they get large, it can get slow, but if you have some megabytes or up to a gigabyte, this can be a good option to always have updated index structures and database statistics and so on. Okay. Talking about web applications, we have added a browser-based database administration interface, and there have been some rationales behind this. On the one hand, this is meant as a showcase for REST-XQ development. And Red is sitting here as well. He was the one who presented REST-XQ, I think 3 years ago, something on the full conference. And we now heavily use it for our applications. But people frequently ask us what can be done with REST-XQ, and as most of the systems we build are closed source with REST-XQ, this was one reason why we wanted to add the open source version of that. And I can quickly show you how this looks like. Okay, so this is the start. So here you see the local, maybe it's not too small, the local REST. Okay, so I think I have to start the server, BaseX HTTP. Right, so now here you can log in with a secret password. Please change it if you use it in productive use. And now you have access to all the databases that are currently exist. You can look at some of these. Here we have 1 GB file, and you see even if it's 1 GB, you quickly get a preview of this file. And you can also run some queries on top of that, like /item, for example. And although it's 1 GB, it's pretty fast, because of course we chop the result after some megabytes. And you can do all the other things like creating databases, choose some option, you can add some documents here, you can run some queries. And this is very simple compared, for example, to Excite from Exist, which is really a great browser-based IDE. Here you can only run for the moment simple queries, but you also have a real-time mode in which you can directly run your queries. And if you write queries that take a bit long, so this is one of the queries that is pretty short, but can break your system easily. So if you run from 1 to a big number and you check for each number if this one is 0, this will never give you any results. But yeah, you can now specify a timeout, and for this we use our XQuery eval function, and we have added some options like maximum amount of memory taken for this and maximum amount of time and so on. So this shouldn't break, and if you manage to break it, then please report back to us. We try our best to make it rather stable, but of course if you create many databases at the same time and so on, then you need to experience how this works. Well, as I meant, this is also a showcase for REST-XQ. We are not sure if you really want to make a full-fledged database interface from this. It also depends on you, on your appearances. But yeah, at least it's a better interface for interacting with server-side databases than the GUI. And of course, your contributions are also appreciated. Maybe I can show how the code base looks like. Not all of it, obviously, but part of it. So I will go to our web app, DB directory. So here, maybe go to database directory, and here you see some REST-XQ code, some imports, some variables, all the REST-XQ annotations, and some code. Here you also see that we use web eval, which calls either XQuery eval or let's see where this is, or it uses the client module, because I haven't told you this, but if you log in, then you can also specify a remote address. So you can also administer your remote BaseX instances from a local instance, and that's the reason why we specify those commands that use any database commands like db list details, db info, as that eval. Okay, then we have simple templating engine and the entries, and we are creating buttons and so we try to document it properly, everything, and so on. So, yeah. Just give us your feedback if you think it's helpful. Okay. Talking about REST-XQ, we added some more minor features this time. For example, you can now specify regular expressions in the REST path notation. These ones can extend over multiple path segments. So this is sometimes helpful if you have paths that are more or less dynamically. So we have some more freedom here. Next, we added some support for quality factors in content negotiation. So whenever your browser says, for example, please give me HTML. If you don't have it, I would also take XML. Then we evaluate these factors and try to give the best media type back. We have REST methods annotation, which can be used to define custom methods. This is, for example, useful if you want to implement WebDAV on top of REST-XQ. And we slightly extend our annotation. We also work on security. All of the users are now represented in XML. Before, as you may know, it was a rather cryptic file called that was BaseX perm. This was a binary file. Now you have much more readable representation of all the users. Next, we dropped MD5 and we are using salted SHA-256, and we also added digest authentication for web clients. Those are also used in the client bindings. So we also have some new language bindings, but those are compatible with older versions of BaseX. Talking about XQuery, XQuery 3.1 is nearly finished, and we also try to finish it as soon as possible as well. So maps have been in BaseX for quite a while. They're also supported by XSDB and Saxon, of course, because Michael Kay wrote the original specification, and the final version looks pretty much the same as the original one. Now you also have arrays in XQuery. Some people ask me, why do you use arrays? We had that 50 years ago, before we had XML and everything. And of course, usually you use sequences in XQuery. But sometimes you don't want to flatten your data, and then arrays come in very handy. We also have the lookup operator. Maybe I can give you a quick glimpse into our documentation. If I had internet. Okay, I don't have internet, so I think I have. XQuery 3.1. So here we have some examples for the lookup operator. So this is mostly a navigation syntax for maps and arrays. In this case, we don't use the slash, but we use the question mark to access entries in maps and arrays. We can also use this syntax in parentheses, because maps and arrays are always functions in XQuery. So this is more or less a question of matter of taste. We also have a wildcard syntax. This is sometimes helpful to access all the entries directly. Okay. Then we have the arrow operator. This is another convenience operator. You can specify an input, and then you can use this operator, and then you have another function, and the input will be taken as first argument for your next function. One other feature, which may make many users lucky probably, is the adaptive serialization. It has just been more or less finalized a short while ago. The usual serialization method is XML for all your data. So whenever you had a string with some special entities, for example, then those ones were output in the same way as the input. And now in the adaptive serialization, this will really be output as a string. So if you have some applications that are based on the BaseX output, you may need to just adjust this. But if you have the string, for example, as XML, then it will still be serialized as XML. And if you have things like maps, this is a map, this is an array, sorry, and you will also get a string representation of this array. And before, BaseX and most other processes told you function items cannot be serialized. And if someone types in something like this, and he doesn't really know all the internals, then he or she might be pretty confused why this should be a function int item and this cannot be serialized. So many users at Stack Overflow and mailing list asked what's actually going on here. So I'm quite happy that this new serialization method makes many things easier. You can also output attributes, for example. Before, if you wrote something like this, you got an error. Now you simply get the attribute value back. Okay. XQuery 3.1 provides better JSON support. We have various new functions, like a sort function, so you don't always need to write for, where, order, return. You can simply use one function. And we have articulation features. All this is covered in documentation. Talking about XQuery update, we have added a new mode. It's called mix updates. It allows you to mix updating expressions and still output some results. This is also something people have been confused about in the past. If you like delete node A, this one is a valid query. This simply deletes this node that we've just specified. If you then had another query, then it told you all expressions must be updating by using this set mix updates option. This query is now valid, so you can also return things at the same time. But you always need to specify this option. There may be such an option in XQuery 3.0 update, in the update facility. Yeah, but it's still unclear how this will exactly look like. So that's also one of the reasons why this is simply an option and not default. Some other vendors like EMC, for example, they allow something like this by default internally. And yeah, we may make this default if it works out well. Let's see. We've done many query optimizations. If you have nested predicates, for example, open some queries. I think this one was one of them. So here we are opening a database. We are retrieving countries, and then we have multiple nested predicates. And if you run this query, then you will see the query info. Those are the rewriting steps. And the final query will look like this. We are directly accessing the text index, and we are retrieving all the parents and ancestors. So before, those nested predicates could not be rewritten. Now it works. Then we rewrite flower clauses. If we open a database which is bound to this variable, and this information is propagated through all the other variables, so this query will as well be rewritten for index access for simple things in this case. We have some smarter function inlining. Function inlining was added around 2 years ago, but there are many cases in which we need to find out which function is the best to be inlined and which not. Probably not all of you know too much about function inlining. The main idea is that we have one function, and this function calls another function, and if this function is called multiple times, then it takes some time to run the other function all the time. So what we do here is we take this content, the body of the function, and we inline it, and this allows to do some more optimizations, and so in many cases the functions are inlined. Queries are evaluated much faster because we don't have so many calls, and we can do local operations, local optimizations that wouldn't be possible otherwise by calling the function. And if we run this function, for example, and we see that the resulting query is not obvious, we had a local odd call in the beginning, now we are calling local even as entry point, and we only have this function here. So you see some things are going on, and often we are surprised what queries we get, but the results are correct. Still. Okay, and we did much things on iterative processing, whenever it's possible to evaluate paths in an iterative way. This means we don't get all the results, we only get the results we really need. Yeah, this works better than before as well. We have lots of new and updated functions. Here are only some examples. We have a write log function, which allows you to directly write text to your database log files. This is also helpful in the REST-XQ scenario. For example, if a user logs in, then you can write such information to the database logs. Many other things like alter database, copy database, create backups have been added along with the implementation of the DBA. Well, fetch XML, you can retrieve docs and specify some options like HTML parsing and so on. The file module is now finalized. We met yesterday with the EX path guys, and we decided to add these 3 functions. Now it's an official EX path file, EX path module. We have some more full text functions. With HTTP send request, you can now use digest authentication as well. We have some user functions. We have an XQuery update function, which performs the updates defined in your query, which will then be added to the main pending update list. So now you can also specify dynamic queries with updates, which will then be executed in the final summarized pending update list. You have an XQuery pass function, which gives you some information on the way the query has been parsed. Talking about XQunit, this has already been introduced last time. Now we have gathered up the first experiences, and we decided to make XQunit runnable outside XQuery. Before we had one, I think it was a unit run function, but because of that we couldn't test updates. And now we have, similar to JUnit, many functions. Some of them can contain updates. They are all run sequentially. And you can do some updates, and in the next functions you can test them. We also have some before and after annotations which allow you to bundle updates to a specific test function, for example. So in this case we also have a test command, a command line flag, and some basic GUI support to run those tests. In the GUI, only some more obvious things have changed. You can sort data. This is really very fast because we use the same features as internally for XQuery. And yeah, otherwise it's very basic. You can merge duplicates, sort for case, and so on. But this is a good option if your usual editor is a bit slow, if you really have millions of entries to sort, and this works out pretty well. You have a better search integration. So maybe you know that you can look for entries in your file, and those will also be searched in the other files. Maybe I go back to the queries I had before. So you see now this file has this string. I can look for some others. They have another string, so all the results will automatically be highlighted and so on. And it's pretty easy to do operations on many files. And yeah, we've done some very basic code completions for all kinds of functions. So you simply add some letters. If there is only one completion, it will automatically be completed. Otherwise, you can choose some others. All right. That's so far from my side. I would like to ask you, what are the features that you miss most in the current versions of BaseX? Do you have some requests, please?
Very simple. You mentioned the function HTTP send request.
Right.
And up to now, I think it does not support digest authentication.
That's also included now, yeah.
It's included?
Yeah, I just did this 1 week ago or something.
Very glad.
Next one. Yeah?
Yeah, this is an issue I entered GitHub a couple of years ago. I'd like to have more than 256 namespaces to be indexed.
Okay, yeah.
The use case is that I like to index my hard disk, and there are lots of all kinds of XSLT, XProc, etc., XML. And in total, they have more than 256 namespaces. So this is currently not possible to index.
Okay, yeah. We had some thoughts on adding this to BaseX 8. The main reason why we delayed this again was that we needed to update our storage layout, because we simply only have 8 bits to store this reference to the namespace. And yeah, this was the reason why we delayed it again.
I have some bits with me.